Hey you guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin'. Today we're talking about the biggest summertime mistake that I see anglers make. There's one location that is almost completely overlooked. And today I'm gonna show you how to catch the fish that live there. Lakes get crowded in the summertime. You've got more fishermen, you've got more pleasure boaters, you've got more people swimming and playing along the shore. The lakes just get crowded. But the fishing can still be amazing. If you are continuing to struggle this summer, if you're just not catching fish, you're not finding them, I can almost guarantee that you have forgotten about offshore, outside grass. That's what we're going to talk about today. At least that's where we're going to start. After that, I've got some stuff for the guy who's on a lake with no grass too. I've even got some stuff for the guy who's walking the bank. So stick with me. But the number one most overlooked location, the biggest mistake I see people make in the summertime is that they continue to fish visual cover. They fish that lay down, they fish that lay down, they fish the clump of grass they see on the bank, they fish a dock, but they do not move to the outside edges. On a lake that has grass, the number one place to catch quality bass in the summertime is the outermost grass edge. Now on your lake, depending on how steep it is, that outermost grass edge can be 10 feet offshore. Take a place like the California Delta. There's an outside grass edge right off the bank and it's a wall and the fish will sit there. But then you've also got these lakes with these outside grass edges that can be 1/8 of a mile, 1/4 mile offshore, way out there. You get up near the bank and it's just a grassy mess. It might be a cheese field, it might be submerged grass. But the farther out you go, all of a sudden you find the edge where the grass finally stops growing. There finally stops being enough light penetration into the water. And right there on that edge, the grass stops. And you've got hard bottom beyond that. That edge is as good as a shoreline. The difference is very few people are fishing that shoreline. Very few people are out there on that grass edge, and it can be magical. And again, it varies lake to lake. On some lakes, it's cheese, goop on top, right to the edge, and then boom, there's the wall. In other lakes, you can't see the grass for 400 yards unless you're standing up looking down and you can see the tops of the grass 2, 3, 4 feet below the surface. But when you get to that hard edge, there it is. So let's talk about that first. Then we'll back up and we'll talk about how to do something very similar in places that really have no grass or have very little grass. So understanding bass behavior, there are bass that will go all the way in and they'll be on the innermost edge of that grass. But the bigger ones tend to be on that outermost edge. They love to hunt those edges, both inside and outside. The biggest thing about that edge is to understand that even though you're out in the middle of nowhere, even though you have no visual cues, it is very rarely a straight edge. It will almost always have little points, little pockets. It's not straight. If you really start to look, and you can look with your eyes, you can look with your electronics. One of the biggest tools is Google Earth. Get on your phone, get on your PC, and look at Google Earth, and you'll see those edges in your lake. Once you can identify the edges, you treat it just like a shoreline. We all know that if you go down a shoreline, there's not bass everywhere, right? The points, the coves, the rock piles, the things that are different are the best spots on the shore. When you get to that outer grass edge, it's going to be the same thing. Now, once in a blue moon, I'll find a lake. Typically, it'll be a natural lake, one with no dam, or it's just sort of a bowl. And that outside grass edge pretty well mirrors the outer edge of the lake, and it'll just be a round edge. But even on that, you're gonna find little bumps, but they might take a little more time. But in most lakes, you can find actual grass points, grass coves, high spots where the grass gets almost to the surface, low spots where that grass dips way down. Any of those spots that are different are key. Now, how you approach it is up to you. I have a handful of baits that I have a ton of confidence in. I'm gonna share those with you. Then we'll shift gears and we'll talk about a lake with no grass. The number one thing I like to do when I'm fishing outside grass in the summertime is throw topwater. The biggest reason for throwing a topwater is one, I never get stuck in the grass. And two, I can cover an extraordinary amount of water. Notice I did not hold up a popper. The reason why I'm holding these baits is they are faster moving. I want to cover water. I may fish this lake a ton, this imaginary lake that we're talking about, and I already know where the points and the pockets are on that grass edge, and I know how to go right to them and catch them. But more often than not, I'm exploring. And if you haven't experienced this yet on your lake, then you definitely don't know where those spots are. So goal number one is cover a lot of water until we start getting bites. Early morning, even peak of sun in the afternoon, honestly, topwater can be amazing. So two styles of bait. If the water is slick, like it is right now, see this mirror out here behind me? I can't think of a better bait than that one right there. The Megabass Giant Dog X is one of my biggest confidence topwater baits. I just know that if the fish are set up, this is a bait they're going to eat. I'm not wasting time. I know they will take a shot at that bait. It's a very subtle topwater. Again, I want slicked off conditions like this. Once it gets past about a ripple on the surface, I stop throwing that one. I like that bait when it's extremely calm, but it works so well. I have gotten so many giant summertime bites on that outside grass on that bait right there. Now, if I start to get some chop on the water, then I need to make a little bit of ruckus, and I still want to cover a lot of water, and that's where the Whopper Plopper comes in. The River to Sea Whopper Plopper, that's the 110 size. I'll throw a 110 or a 130, but the 110 more and more, it seems like in the last few years, bass fishing has toughened up a little bit, and that 110 just gets bit. But that bait right there lets me cover a ton of water. Whether or not there's chop, whether or not there's waves, whether or not there's wakeboarders driving by, that thing makes enough commotion to pull those fish up. Now, when it's like this, that can be too much commotion. Thus, the 1-2 punch. But a topwater is my number one choice. My number two choice, if they won't come up for whatever reason, maybe I see them boil below it, but they don't commit to it, or maybe I just see nothing at all and I've thrown topwater for an hour, nothing's happening, I'll switch over to a chatterbait. The chatterbait, again, allows me to cover a ton of water. It's weedless because, again, we're fishing a weed edge. So it's weedless, and I can be very aggressive with it. I have the spunk shad on the back there. That Hog Farmer spunk shad allows me to pop and work and cut and get that bait to dart and move, and I can draw reaction strikes from these outside fish, because a lot of times they'll come out and they'll follow just on instinct, right? And you'll see one chase it all the way to the boat, but they never eat it. But if I'm working and popping that reel or twitching that rod tip, I can get those fish to commit because they're chasing that chatterbait. It's up there vibrating. That lip is doing its thing. They're following, but then all of a sudden it pops and darts and they think it's trying to get away. And that's when they make their move. I'll throw a lot more of the bluegill type colors. In fact, this is a Tackle Warehouse exclusive colored trailer that looks so good. I mean, look at that pairing. Looks awesome. But I tend to throw those bluegill type colors because we'll see a lot of bluegill and panfish out in that outside grass this time of year. My next one, and the only reason it's third, is because I have to fish it just a little bit slower. And that is the soft jerkbait. This is the X-Zone Whiplash shad, and you guys have seen us fished this bait and talk about this bait a lot in the last few years. I really like how fluid this bait is in the water. It's very snaky in its movements. But that soft jerk bait, again, it checks all the boxes. It's weedless. I can cover a lot of water, though not as much water as I can with the others, but still I can cover a ton of water. And when I hook them, I've got them on that big hook and I've got them good. Now, one cool thing about the soft jerk bait is that depending where I position my hook, I can change the action of the bait. So right here, see how far back that hook is coming out? That right now, the bait wants to sink very level. So it sinks slowly. It also rises quickly when I start to twitch it. So if I fish this fast with that hook back like that, it's about half top water, half subsurface. But if I go ahead and re-rig this, and I move that hook forward, and I just barely put it up there in the nose, like this, see that there, how much farther forward it is? That little adjustment, when this thing hits the water, causes it to go head first. Now it wants to dive, so it'll sink faster. It's no longer this flat level sink, it's a nosedive. And when I want to work it, it's naturally in that nosedive position, so it will stay down. It's very hard for me to get this bait to come to the surface now, so I can force it to stay below the surface. And I'm getting two unique actions out of the same bait and the same hook with just a little adjustment. And again, in the video description, I'll give you all these specifics. I'll link the baits, the trailers, the hooks, exact colors, my confidence colors, so you guys can start from a place of confidence. But again, that soft jerk bait gives me a lot of options to pull those fish up. Now, what we've talked about so far is my ideal scenario, right? I drive my boat out, I find that outer edge, or I get on Google Earth on my phone, I find that outer edge, I go out there, and I get lined up and I start following that edge. And again, in a lot of lakes, it's visual. You'll see little grass sticking up here or there, but in some lakes, it's all down. Either way, I'm using the baits and I'm finding that edge and I'm following it. Now, because it is an edge, there's a top and there's a bottom, right? There's a where the grass ends down on the bottom, and that might be 6 feet deep, that might be 25 feet deep. It depends on how clear your lake is. The clearer the lake, the deeper that outside edge is going to be, because the grass grows out deeper. So what we've talked about so far is my best case scenario. I show up and they're willing to eat a topwater, a chatterbait, a soft jerkbait, and I'm just moving and catching them. But some days you get out there, it is the middle of summer, and it's just not going the way you expected. You're doing all the things and it's still not happening. You're on that outside edge and you're still not catching them. Sometimes the fish just sort of get in the doldrums, but they're still out there. They have nowhere left to go. They're going to stay on that grass edge. So that's when I'll start bottom fishing. And what I mean is I take those first three and I throw them up on top of the grass. But if the fish have pulled and they're down at the bottom edge, because that does happen, especially in the middle of a really hot day, that's when you'll see me drop down. You're either going to see me throw a jig. Typically, I'm going to throw a 1/2 ounce pitching jig, the pack of Slim on the back of it. It's one of my standard go-to baits. And again, I'll link it in the description. The other one is a shaky head. 1-2 punch there. But these are baits that I can fish on the bottom outermost edge of the grass. So let's say in this hypothetical situation, the grass is 5 feet below the surface where it rolls off, and that outer edge is 14 foot. So I'll be following on that outer edge, throwing up on top. That way my top water lands, you know, 1/2 cast back over 5 foot of grass. And I work it all the way out, and then I work it all the way right off that edge. So I keep my boat just outside. But if that's not happening, I turn parallel and I take a jig or a shaky head and I throw it out and I let it go to bottom. And I want to land just inside the grass. Ideally, you know, 2 to 5 feet into the grass, because that's where those bass tend to be. They'll sit in that edge and they'll look out. They can hunt that open water while being protected. and I'll work it just parallel right down through that grass edge. If I don't know exactly where the edge is, my next cast, I reach out a little farther. Next cast, a little farther, and then all of a sudden I'm not feeling anything. It's just smooth bottom. Okay, bring it back in, pull it through the grass. But I find that that 1-2 punch will get a lot of those fish on those days where for whatever reason, they're shut down. That single location, that outermost grass edge, not fishing that is the biggest mistake I see people make. So many times I'll come to a brand new lake I know nothing about, and there'll be boats all over the place. They're all fishing visual cover. Tim and I'll head to that outside edge, and it's like we're fishing in a lake where the bass have never seen a lure. We're just out there cracking them, and we know nothing about the lake. We just know to check the outside edge. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about grass. For the guy whose lake has no grass, you're in a highland reservoir, you've got no grass, or maybe you do have grass, but it tends to only be in the pockets. It's not on the outer points. I get it. For you, you've heard us talk about this before. We talk a lot about the color line. I want to make sure I'm clear on what a color line is. The color line, Google Earth is the best place to see it, okay? Just to give you a visual to start with. The shallows, you look at Google Earth of a lake, the shallows will tend to be like tan or brown. And then as you work out, as you get to the deep water, it turns to that dark blue color, right? That edge where it switches from a lighter color to a darker color, that is called the color line. The color line in a lake with no grass is just as important as an outer grass line. It's an amazing fish holding location, even though there's nothing out there. And depending on the reservoir, that color line could be out over 7, 8, 10 feet of water. It can be out over 70, 80, 100 feet of water in crystal clear water. It'll be way, way out there. And those bass will still suspend on that color line. What that color line actually is where the sun is beating down on the water. If the sun can penetrate the water and hit bottom, then you tend to see that lighter color. But when the water gets just deep enough that that sun is hitting and it's not making it all the way to bottom, that's where you start seeing that dark colored water. So that's what that is. That edge is where the sunlight stops reaching the bottom. Bass hold on that edge like it is a piece of hard cover. It's remarkable. The reason why is that they can sit down in that dark water and look around, and everything above them is lit. If shad go out there, if trout go out there, if anything gets out in that open, they can see it. But they're hunting from below, and nothing can look down and see them. So again, they treat it just like a grass edge or a dock or a rock wall, and they sit on that color line suspended in open water. Now, modern electronics, live sonar, forward-facing sonar, huge advantage in that situation. But we didn't dream this up last year or the year before. We've been doing this for decades with none of that. So if your boat doesn't have it, who cares? Don't let that get in your head at all. Here's the trick. The color line, just like an outside grass line, is not all created equal. They're not on every inch of it. So all you need to do is take a look at your lake. The best points, the points that stick way out, or the points that divide creek arms, or both points where the lake narrows down, the points on both sides, any point that has current wrapping around it, those are your key places. You don't need forward-facing sonar to find that. I can do it with a map in 2 seconds. I can look at any lake and just ID a bunch of really good spots to go check. And after that, fish on the color line tend to be really aggressive. So by the time the guy with forward facing gets out there, sets up, starts looking around, we've already pulled up, made the key casts, and either caught him or not caught him. So don't let it get in your head that you don't have all the modern tools. In this situation, it doesn't matter because these fish tend to be really aggressive. My number one way to target them, I don't care if that water's 10 feet deep on the color line or 140 feet deep on the color line, my number one way to target them is top water. It's incredible how far they will come. It's incredible. They will spot a bait on the surface and they will come a long way to get it. Fishing color lines in the heat of summer was the number one place that I fell in love with throwing wake baits. The wake bait on the medium retrieve, it's got that hard clack, pushing that big V wake. That big V on the surface with a big swim bait coming across open water, it's just a giant magnet. Even if the fish haven't spotted the bait yet, they see that huge V out there on the surface, they hone in on the swim bait that's causing it, and here they come. They might come 20, 30, 40, 50 feet to get to that bait in clear water. The wake bait is my favorite way to fish the color line. I have had days in June, July, and August where I have caught more than 100 bass a day on big wake baits. 8-inch wake baits, 10-inch wake baits, 12-inch wake baits, and they're not all giant fish. A lot of times when I'm catching those kinds of numbers, it's spotted bass fisheries. And a lot of them will be 1 and 2 pounders, but you get those really big ones too. But the wake bait is a remarkable way to target those fish. Now, if I need to cover even more water, it'll be a walking bait. Now, a lot of times I use it like a 1-2 punch. I'll pull up on a point, I'll fire my big bait first. This is the tactical wake. That's the bait that Tim and I designed. I throw that wake out there and I make my handful of casts out across the end of that point, out there on the color line, and then I set it down. Maybe I catch a few, maybe I don't, but either way, when it cools off, if I'm catching them, once it stops, then I go to the walking bait and I repeat and I try to pick off a few more fish. One thing that is key is size. Again, you're trying to draw fish out in open water. So a lot of times we talk about that Shower Blows 105. That's not my favorite bait in that more open water situation. I upsize to the 115. That's the SB 115. That bigger profile will pull fish farther. There's no question about it. Now, just like what we talked about the first time, there's times where they don't want to come all the way to the surface. And after that, my pattern comes down to this hook right here. So I'll be throwing big baits and top water, but I'm always going to have that rod with just a little wacky hook on it. That's that finesse wide gap. If I've got a 1/0 finesse wide gap tied on a spinning rod or a BFS rod ready to rock, I'm in business because I can grab one of 2 baits. One's the soft jerk bait. The other is the 5-inch Senko. Seems crazy, especially if we're out there in 100 feet of water. But I'm telling you, that is the backup bait. Those fish will come a long way for a meal. And if I just can't get them to break the surface, they're following, but they're not committing, you go for the nose hook on the soft jerk bait. That way I can continue to throw this on 6 or 8 pound line, and I can convert a lot of those followers as they're leaving. But if it's one of those days where they just will not react, I take that off, I grab that 5-inch Senko, I throw a lot of green pumpkin or a lot of natural shad. Those are sort of the 2 that I try. But you take that Senko and you just make bomber casts and you just let it free fall on that color line. Again, I'm throwing a Senko in some situations, 120 feet of water. And then I just watch my line. And I'll let that bait sink 10 or 15 feet with no movement and then wind it up, move over, throw it out on the color line again. I'm not searching for fish at that point. I've already found fish. I already know this is a likely location. I'm just trying to get these fish to bite. But it'll blow your mind how well a soft jerk bait, whether that's a fluke or an adrenaline craw, a whiplash shad, regardless of which one you choose, it'll be remarkable how many fish you can get to come out in that open water and commit to that stuff. It's really amazing. Now, for the guy who is on the bank, because so far you're like, well, this is the most unhelpful video ever. Yeah, I'm making the biggest mistake. I don't have a boat. I can't get to the outside grass line. What am I supposed to do? I get it. Here's what you do. You've got two possibilities. In the event that you are in a grass lake, you fish the innermost grass line. So in almost every lake that has a lot of grass, right before you get to the shore, there's a little trough there with no grass. It gets too shallow and the grass won't grow. That trough might be a foot wide, it might be 15 feet wide, but there'll be a trough up there that has some open water. You fish that lane the exact same way we just described fishing the outside edge. The exact same way. There are less giants in there, but there are some. But there's a lot of bass in there. And the best part, this is one of the times where being a bank angler is awesome. Because in a lake that's truly grassed in, the boats can't even access that area. So you literally have it to yourself. It's a private pond at that point. Anywhere that you can get in and fish that inner grass edge, you will have fish that are untouched. And that water is almost always crystal clear because all that grass is filtering that water. So this unbelievably clear water right up against the bank in lakes that are often murky out there on the outside. If you're in a lake that doesn't have the grass, again, we're talking about fishing that color line, you can do that from shore as well. You're going to get on Google Earth or on a map, and you're going to look, instead of looking for those long tapering points, you're going to look for the harshest sheer points that just immediately drop to deep water, and you're going to look for them in areas where the lake gets narrowed down. So if you can find a spot where you've got a big reservoir, maybe one of the arms coming off that reservoir has a little squeeze in it, those points will be super steep. That brings that color line in almost touching shore, and you will absolutely be able to reach it from the bank. And you can throw the exact same baits. You can throw the big wake, you can throw a topwater, you can throw a Senko, you can throw a soft jerk bait. So it's just about choosing the spots appropriately if you're on the shore. Obviously, you can't fish the one that's a quarter mile out there, but you can fish the one that's 10 feet off the bank or 40 feet off the bank, no problem. And there will be big fish in those locations as well. Guys, I mean it. This is the biggest mistake I see people make. Do not overlook that outside stuff. Stop only focusing on visual cover. There's fish on visual cover. There's a reason we all fish it. But if you want those big untouched fish, they're out and you can catch them. I hope this video helped. If it did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.